Guys, I'm so excited to share my guest with you today. His name's Nat Marsh. He's an integral part of an organisation called Dads for Kids. We're going to find out who they are, what they're all about, and what you can take away from their message as a father, as a man, as a family person. Let's get to it. Welcome, Nat. Thanks for taking the time to get on the show with us today.
Honoured to be here, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We're going to have a great conversation. And like we talked about in the intro, you are a very integral part of Dads for Kids. I'd love for you to tell us, the viewers, the listeners, what is Dad for Kids? Who are they? What's their backstory? What are they all about now?
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and shout out the Senator Malcolm Roberts video was fantastic. Thank you. So if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you subscribe. So
thank you.
But yeah, look, Dads for Kids was founded 22 years ago by my parents, Warwick and Alison Marsh, who are, in my humble opinion, they're national treasures.
Right.
They're people that have really dedicated their lives to. They're in full-time ministry, which just means they help people. That's their life calling. They see that but they have a real heart for families and for men. And so they founded Dads for Kids 22 years ago, like I said, and really it's been a labour of love. So Dads for Kids is a harm prevention charity. So it's committed to excellence in fathering is what we like to say. But that just means that we want Aussie dads to be the best dads they can be.
Great.
All of the social sciences point to fatherlessness being the root of so many problems that we have in society. So Dads for Kids is really about trying to address those problems by going to the root of the problem, which is often fatherlessness. So we have a weekly email newsletter that goes out. It's been going for 22 years. So as long as we know, it's the longest running fathering email in the world, as far as we know, which is, we think, a pretty good claim to fame. But that's really helped a lot of dads over the years. Each week we have some tips and encouragement. Really, it's about encouraging men to be the best dads they can be. And then we're sort of famous for our TV ads each year that go on free-to-air television. So I've always been involved in those, and a bit more in recent years.
Yes.
But we run a men's conference in August, just south of Sydney. And we also run courses online, which we've just had. Yeah, so we're doing lots of different things, and it's something I'm really passionate about. But yeah, really something birthed by Warwick and Alison, and they're amazing.
Now, we will get into this later in the show and in our chat, and it'll be in the show notes and description. But you said newsletter, you said TV ads, you said courses, conferences. Just quickly before we lose a chance, where do people find that info?
Yes, so if you go to dadsforkids.org.au, so it's dads4kids.org.au, and you can find out everything on the website.
I'd encourage everyone to do that. Make sure you go and check that out. We will do it again at the end of the show, and it's in the notes below, but make sure you go check that out. They're doing great work. You mentioned fatherlessness. Let's get into that. I think most people who are engaged in their observation of what's going on around about us could see that fatherlessness is a huge issue across society. It doesn't seem to show a bias according to postcode, ethnicity, culture, financial status, maybe a few little inflection points where it's slightly better or slightly worse, but generally across the board, we are seeing an epidemic of fatherlessness around the world, aren't we? Let's get into that for a moment. Why is that happening? What are the causes? What are the drivers? And what are we seeing is the status of that at the moment?
100%. No, look, you're reading the play right, Andrew. And I mean, really, people much smarter than I have studied this for many years. But from what I've read, many people trace it back to the Industrial Revolution. So up until the Industrial Revolution, really, you had people were agrarian. So, families were living on the land. The mum and dad were together. Often the sons were working in the fields with dad. The daughters were working at home with mum, or the family was working together in some way. So families were very much a nuclear family. They were living and working together, and people were closer, and probably because of that, everyone was just sort of happier, and things sort of worked out. And then you obviously had the Industrial Revolution. Families were pulled apart a bit more. So, back then dads were going into the city to work or to the factory to work. And so I think that was really probably the beginning of the breakdown of the family unit. So, fast forward 100, 200 years, we had no-fault divorce coming in the 70s. There's just been a a cascade of anti-family policies
Right.
pile onto that, the mainstream media who seem hell-bent on destroying the family further.
Yes.
Bad policy, like I mentioned, the rise of feminism. I mean, I don't want to get too political, but I think we're up to the third or fourth wave feminism now. Who knows? But I mean, it's really become sort of an anti-male crusade.
Yes.
So you've got this sort of layer upon layer of anti-father forces.
Yes.
And that's really, I think, and sadly, we found ourselves in this epidemic of fatherlessness, like you've said, and that it's really, look, homelessness, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sexual issues, all of these things, crime, can be traced back, sadly, often to fatherlessness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have especially young boys, but fathers are important to daughters as well, to girls, but especially young men are growing up without a father often.
That's right.
And so they're directionless. There's not a sense of identity. Mm-hmm. So young men are seeking out that identity in often bad places.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing the results of that in our society.
Yeah, 100%. I think we've got a couple of parallel tracks running in it as well, in the sense that I do believe there is no tinfoil hat, no conspiracy theory going on here, but I do believe there is an agenda politically and legislatively against the family. Yeah. And the target there is to bust up marriage and particularly to diminish the role of parenting and fathering. Yeah. So there's an agenda-oriented play at work alongside some of the other issues that I would regard more towards the brokenness of humanity. Yeah. And those two tracks running together are wreaking havoc throughout our families. It's interesting, I'm old enough to remember when in mainstream sitcom television, the attack on men and fathers really started, sort of mid to late 80s, where it became the go-to play to make a fool out of the dad. Yeah. He was always the idiot, mum wasn't. Yeah. He was always the dummy, mum wasn't. He was always the lazy slob, mum wasn't. Yeah. And to begin with, it was a little bit of an affront, like, oh, wow. But like the boiling frog analogy, it just settled in to the point where, not even today, but 20 years ago, it was accepted par for the course. Well, it seems like that has laid a platform to become more aggressive. Yeah. It's not just couched in comedy and, cheap slapstick sitcom humour where it used to be, but it's actually very aggressive now. Yeah. And let's go after men. Now, and I should say, this is not let's defend men at all costs as if there were no bad men. There are some bad men, and they do bad things, and they cause problems. But one of the things we are seeing, and I'd love you to comment on this, and it's a hot issue around the world, but in Australia right now, we are seeing the lumping together. A few bad actors are now writing the script, as it were, for the entire demographic, or so it seems. Now, I, for one, I assume you're the same, I would love to be a voice in a growing army of voices that get us back to individual consequences for individual actions, because my experience tells me the large majority of men are not out there thinking, who will I smack around today? Whose life can I ruin today? Most men, most dads are out there trying to do their best. Am I right, or am I seeing that wrong?
100%. So, I mean, to your first point, Bettina Arndt, who's a great friend of Dads for Kids, she says no gender has a monopoly on vice. So it's what you've got there is, she's a great advocate for men. And she would probably say she was a feminist, really, and she's now a voice for men. So, that's one thing. So we've got to get away from this thing that men are always the perpetrators. I mean, yes, there's bad men, but there's also bad women. So we've got to sort of...
Which is the broken humanity issue, right?
Yeah. So we've kind of got to diagnose the problem. So that's number one. But secondly, I think the answer is, we were speaking earlier off camera, but the answer is for men to, and that's why I love the message of Dr. Jordan Peterson has been great, but that message of taking responsibility, getting your life in order. So he says, clean your room, make your bed. Yep. There's simple things, but it's powerful. If men can take that responsibility, lead their families in love. That's what's going to turn this ship around. So
Yes.
now that's one thing, but yeah, having said that, the media, the mainstream media, all these, these bad policies aren't helping. So there's a lot of great people and organisations doing good work, but it's going to take this sort of a critical mass of people like yourself drawing attention to these issues, better policy, the mainstream media just toning down the anti-male rhetoric.
Right.
It's even that I think would be super helpful. But,
Absolutely.
It's going to take all these things to really turn the ship around.
Sure. I think that is one of the passions that I have and I know we share. I'm not trying to set myself up or this channel and the various platforms that I'm on to be, the cheerleader for men per se. But one of the things that I am trying to do is to bring some balance. The pendulum has swung way out of alignment, and we do need to see it return to some common sense things like let an individual person, let's not even talk men for a minute, let's let individual people be responsible for their own actions and pay consequences according to that, instead of taking this approach where we see one or two bad eggs, bad actors, bad apples, whatever metaphor you want to use, and then spreading that across an entire cohort. Because here's what I see, and I'm sure you hear this too, is the large majority of men who are trying to be good men. So none of us are good men all the time. We know that. But the motive of the heart matters. And there's a huge majority of men who want to be good men, who are trying to be good men, but they're beginning to lose heart because the message they hear all the time is, you're all bad. Now, they know it's not true, but they feel like they don't have a voice to push against that. And so I want to be one of those people. Give us your view on that. How do we start to combat that, where those who feel without a voice can regain one and get some courage and speak up and go, hang on a minute, you're smearing us with all these allegations and there's no substance to it.
Well, look, I think number one is for men to take responsibility, and Dads for Kids has played a big part in advocating for, especially for single dads. But I would say Dads for Kids advocacy work has been for men in general. We're very much in the fathering space, but number one, to all the men watching, keep doing what you're doing. If you're providing for your family, it's a grind sometimes, but just stick at it, because your wife needs you, your kids need you. So just be encouraged, keep up the great work, number one. Number two, I think we need more people like yourself. I don't want to pick on you, Andrew, but there's not many people in Australia drawing attention to these issues. But we need more people, in media, in government, pulling that pendulum back, so to speak, because it's swung way out of it's. I mean, look. Again, from Dads for Kids perspective, we have a couple of men in our current Courageous Fathering course. They can't see their kids. These guys aren't. Maybe relationally they made some mistakes. Maybe they weren't always there for their partner or their wife. But we've got situations where men can't see their kids because the courts made this sort of arbitrary choice that all men are bad. So. The ex-partner can bring an accusation. That accusation doesn't even need to be proved in court. If she just brings the accusation, there's 6 months, 12 months can go by where he won't see his children. So you've got men in these situations. It's debilitating.
Absolutely.
And it brings depression. I don't know if we want to talk about suicide.
Absolutely, we should.
Men, we've got... We've got 6 to 8 men each day killing themselves, mate. It's a national tragedy.
It is.
Why aren't the politicians talking about that? We currently have a campaign about domestic violence.
Yes.
We need that. Domestic violence is an absolute tragedy. But what about the tragedy
100%.
of men killing themselves
100%.
every day? In this country, it's happening every day.
Every day. That's
and
right.
that is something that should be front page news.
100%. You're absolutely spot on. It's not getting the airtime that it should get because it is a national tragedy. And I'm with you. A lot of the focus right now on domestic violence, particularly against women and children, of course it should get airtime. And any man worth his salt is an advocate for that message as well. Protect and make it safe for women and children.
100%.
However, we do see people like our Prime Minister who seems very, very proud to march at the front of that one. And I'm not saying that this is the case because we don't know the internal mechanisms of his thoughts. But from the outside, it does look like a vote recruiting mission because he'll be very visible on that tragedy, but he is AWOL on other issues, as you say, like the leading demographic of suicide in this country is still middle-aged men. And I do want to get into some of what you said there as it relates to suicide and hopelessness, because I hear the same thing as well from a lot of men who can't see their kids, or things have become very difficult. They've had some information go against them that was false, or the courts have not really taken a balanced view. And it's becoming a compounding factor. Now, again, for the sake of anyone who is looking for a hot button, we want to be clear, we are not condoning at all any men who raise a fist towards a woman or children. Absolutely not. But what we are saying is, only dealing with one negative doesn't erase the existence of the other negatives, right? And so talk to us about that for a moment, especially dads for kids, solo dads, or dads who can't see their kids because of divorce and the courts have not given a balanced ruling, and that leads into hopelessness and suicide contemplation. There's a lot just there, but tell us what you were hearing about that.
So, I mean, and rightly so, because I think probably the Aussie, let's say the way of Aussie men in the past has been just to not talk about things. So, so Dads for Kids, one of the things we're focused on is getting men together, talking. That's what our fathering courses are about. That's what our Men's Leadership Summit in August is about. It's about we get men together in a safe space. We don't like the word safe space, but it is a place where they can share their hearts. And they open up and it's encouraging and they actually feel better afterwards. There's actually been times where I can't shut them up. So they just get talking and it's like almost a healing thing for some men. So that's great. We're seeing that change happening in our society. We're seeing a bigger focus on mental health, which is all great. It's all positive. But for men in particular, there's some groups we work with, they talk about situational suicide. So it's not something that we really talk about, but a big contributing factor towards male suicide is relationship breakdown. And men find themselves in these situations, and the nature of masculinity is that where men tend to be assertive, which is great. That's what helps men to fight wars and build great buildings. But what it means is if they find themselves in a situation where they feel powerless or out of control, or that everything's against them, they do something crazy or something tragic, like taking their own life. So often there'll be a compounding effect, and something like receiving a negative, a bad court order, or a false allegation, or a legal document saying you won't see your children for the next 6 months or 12 months, that can be enough to tip men over the edge. So Dads for Kids believes we need to move the conversation. Let's keep the conversation going about better mental health and taking care of your health in general. But we do need to move this conversation more to situational things and actually identify some of the actual problems men face. I'm glad you brought up the example of the Prime Minister, because we had this last year. The Labor government basically made the family court system worse for single men, for dads. So they rolled back some of the good reforms that the Howard government had brought in. And basically now men face even more hurdles in the court system. So I wish the Prime Minister would listen to men more. It seems like he's only listening to one side.
It does seem that way.
That's we want to try and give him the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't look good. So we really need to change that conversation around men's issues and recognise that men have issues. We often just suck it up and get on with it and keep going, that's a positive, that's a good trait. But the negative side of that is sometimes we need to reach out for help when we need it. And
that's right.
If there's anyone watching this today, if you need help, reach out. Reach out to a mate. There's great services out there that are available. But, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to insert that here before we get too deep, and to say exactly that Guys need to be helped. I think we're doing better to help men lift the shame or the embarrassment or the intimidation of talking. There's no doubt there is power in talking. I think taking stuff that churns here and getting it out in front of you, getting some light on it, getting some perspective on it, it helps. But often guys don't know where the first move is. So it is the right time. I don't want to wait till the end of our conversation to say that guys should, ring a brother, ring a workmate, talk to someone that you have a beer with at the pub. It doesn't really matter where and when, just start the process. If you're not sure where to start, put a comment down below and reach out to me. Honestly, send an email, shoot a message, shoot a DM. It will get read, it will get responded to, and someone will help you to find that path. It's so important. We all have heard too many stories about a friend or a friend of a friend who did take their own life, and then you quiz with the family and friends who are left behind later and say, how many signs did you see? And more often than not, they will say, at the time, we didn't notice. But looking back now, maybe there were one or two hints. But often there's a road of silence that precedes it. And I really think one of the things that happens at a very deep level for men, of course, this could apply to women and teenagers and everyone, but we're focusing here mostly on dads and men. I think what happens internally is they do reach a deep, deep, dark place of hopelessness. Hope is a voice and a light that keeps calling you forward. It gives you a reason to get through the difficulties of today. It gives you a reason to say, grit your teeth, just a couple more months, or, hold on, there's better days ahead. But when you lose that sense of tomorrow could be better than today, it gets pretty dark, right?
Oh, look, and I can't imagine. I mean, I'm blessed, Andrew. I have a wonderful wife. I have 5 beautiful daughters. I couldn't begin to imagine a man that's gone through a relationship breakdown or has maybe lost his job, family's falling apart, and then to have a judge say, "Oh, you're not going to see your kids," or the ex makes this allegation. I can't imagine how difficult that must be.
Absolutely.
But like you so beautifully said, reach out. Hopelessness, once it sets in, it's like a shroud over the soul. It can be really hard to shake.
Absolutely.
And the only way is to, like you said, get some light on it, share it with a friend, or reach out to someone. If you just try and suffer in silence, it's not going to go well. So,
no, that's right.
Really, men have got to really confront these issues and ask for help.
Absolutely. I think talking is the start point. And like I say, whether you're talking to a brother, a work colleague, a random acquaintance at the pub, after footy on a Saturday, it doesn't really seem to matter where you start. But what I do find, in my context, I'm doing a lot of work with a varied type of clients, including men, in mentoring spaces and counselling and coaching in businesses and a whole variety of things like that. And as you know, my background is 25 plus years in not-for-profit and Christian ministry spaces working with families. I do observe that the talking is a start point. But pretty soon after that, we do seem to observe a rate of positive change dependent on how skillful the diagnosis is as step number 2. And what I mean by that is generally people don't get into a really dark place for no reason. Generally, there are reasons. Now, whether that is neurochemistry or whether that's a trauma, whether that's a problem in their finances or in their health or a relationship breakdown or all of the above, there are reasons. It's not random. It's not mysterious. And what I do find happens for a lot of people, a lot of men, that sets them back and doesn't help them is the source or the root of their inner life struggle is misdiagnosed. And so you start to treat a non-existent source issue and it just becomes like a Band-Aid. Whereas the opposite is true. If you can locate what is the source here, why does this man feel hopeless? Is it to do with what we said? Has he struggled with his money? Has he got an addictive personality? Is there a relationship breakdown? Is there some kind of trauma that's still shaping him? Is it just the broken humanity issue? Is it a generational issue where a circuit breaker is required? There's so many issues And I do find that if diagnosis is not skillful and wise, we can send a man off on what seems like a forward pathway, but he actually ends up going round and round and round a mountain.
Yeah.
When actually we want to shorten the distance between the point A and the point B transformation, save a few more men from that cliff edge of hopelessness.
Yeah.
What do you see in that regard in your experience with helping men to discover what's going on internally?
Yeah.
What's causing you all this angst that's got you to the place you're in?
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, number one is talking. Look, at Dads for Kids, we're not professional counsellors, so we do get, sadly, weekly phone calls from men who are often at their wits' end.
Right.
And we do have some services that we can recommend. So by all means, if you're in that situation,
Sure.
jump onto the Dads for Kids website, and hopefully we can point you in the right direction. But yeah, really, it's number one's talking. But then I would say recommend, finding a good counsellor, someone who he's a professional and can offer you that good diagnosis.
Yes.
And there's support out there. There is support out there. I would also add, Dads for Kids is a faith-based charity.
Right.
So we serve all men. We work with all men, men from all faiths and backgrounds. But, we're very much we have a Christian ethos. So I would say when you get right to the root of these things, it's often a spiritual problem or certainly a soul problem. So ultimately, the answer is to know your Father in heaven, if I can say that.
Yes.
And really dealing with some of those deep issues. So, I mean, for us, for Dads for Kids, we often find it's maybe someone had a guy had a bad father or a lack of fathering. So there's men that we work with, maybe their father was abusive or just not there.
Yes.
Or maybe he was there and was emotionally absent. We often find as men do our courses, these issues come up. And so we work with them to deal with those issues. We'll have an exercise during our courses where men will actually write a letter to their father.
Right.
And that's powerful. Like I'm getting emotional just thinking about some of the stories we've had over the years. We've had dads write letters and they're just sobbing, weeping as they're writing them because they're realizing that they're dealing with these issues. These things are coming up. And the great thing about our courses is you're in a group with a group of men, and don't underestimate the power of speaking about these things. So we are, our natural inclination is to bottle these things up inside, but you've got to get them out. You've got to get them out. And if you, like you said, so beautifully said, if you bottle these things up, it's like a cascading effect and it builds up and bad things happen when you let those things build up. So I would just say, talk to someone, seek out a good counsellor. There's good and bad counsellors too. So you got to find a good one that works for you.
That's right.
That you trust and that will give you good advice.
Exactly.
But, look, Dads for Kids is here. I mean, Andrew, you've had a lot of experience in this area too. So reach out to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't say that unless I actually meant it for people to reach out if they feel like they've got nowhere else to go, or they might want to come to me first. That's fine. At the very top, we highlighted this headline, fatherlessness, and rightly so. So we should. It's a big issue. I want to attach another related concept, and you and I in the spaces we've been in would be familiar with this phrase. For my viewers and listeners, this could be a new phrase to them, but we often talk about the father wound. And it's a banner phrase, it's a headline phrase, but it's one that I think we really need to take a few minutes to unpack. Now, I'm not sure how familiar are you with the writings of John Eldredge. I'm sure you're familiar to some degree. He's one of my favourite writers on this subject for men and fathering. And many years ago, he wrote a parenting book. Tiny book, very tiny book.
That sounds like my kind of book.
So for some people, their kind of book, right? Which I love that, because what he did in this book was not try to say everything, but he said a few things. And in that parenting book, he basically said, for all dads out there, he gave 2 pieces of advice. And his solution-based advice is for helping dads to be better dads, but also pointed to why we get into the scenario of needing better dads.
Yeah.
And he used these two phrases. He basically said, every son needs to hear in 1,000 ways, in 1,000 different moments, you have what it takes.
Amen.
And then he went on to say, every daughter needs to hear in 1,000 ways, in 1,000 different moments, you are enough.
Yeah.
And I love the way he couched in that book this simple but powerful, profound advice to dads wanting to be better dads, because not every dad feels like they've got a gift of language or can wrap the right words around, or they struggle with affection. I would be frightened to think of the number of people who grow up without ever hearing their dad say, I love you, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
Men struggle to do these things because they didn't receive it,
Yeah.
which is the point I'm trying to get to, is this idea of the father wound often exists in us because it existed in our father, which is the point of this generational repeating the struggles of our family tree. And what's needed, and maybe this message alone can give some hope to some dads out there, to some men, some future dads, you actually have the power to become a circuit breaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting don't attend to your own soul needs. You should.
Yeah.
You should talk about your issues. You should get healing if you need it. You should get advice if you need it. But maybe just latching on to that thought of, I could be the one that changes my family tree.
Yeah.
I could deal with some issues.
Yeah.
You know, I could deal with some personality traits. I could deal with some role modeling behaviours that were not good in my childhood, or whatever it is. Become the circuit breaker. You know, maybe people watching, listening, maybe you are one of those. You didn't ever hear, I love you, I'm proud of you. Imagine how powerful it would be if those guys climbed over that hurdle and said, well, just because I didn't receive it does not mean I'm going to pass that punishment on. I'm going to break that circuit.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of took that approach a little bit in my own life. I have two kids. I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. And from myself and their mother, without fail, they hear the words, I love you, every day of their life.
Beautiful.
And not because we were so natural to begin with, my wife and I, we both had to push ourselves. But once we got into that momentum, it just became standard language in our house.
Yeah.
I love you, I'm proud of you, I love you before you get it right or wrong.
Yeah.
We actually can attend, can't we, to the father wound by identifying what wasn't right for us, and instead of living there, using that as our clue to go, okay, what is it that needs to stop with me?
Yep.
What's your thoughts?
100%. Couldn't agree more. And Dads for Kids, we're big fans of John Eldridge as well. In fact, Warwick and I, just a few months back, attended, John Eldridge and his team were in Australia just recently, and Warwick and I were able to go to, they call it survival school. But yeah, John Eldridge is great. And his message is, it's as relevant as when he first sort of started talking about this 20 years ago as it is today. Even more relevant. So, you know, the power in those three words, I love you, is incredible. And I would say, you've hit the nail on the head. Really, when I say fatherlessness, we're talking about the father wound. So,
absolutely.
But, you know, sometimes if you talk about a father wound, people are like, whoa, like, I don't have a father wound. What do you know? It's
confronting.
It's confronting, but we need to confront these issues. And I couldn't agree more. We, at Dads for Kids, we talk about leading in love, or, you know, excellence in fathering. We have all these sort of catchphrases we use, but at the end of the day, it's all about showing love to your wife or partner and your children.
And it starts with simple things, doesn't it?
Simple things.
You don't have to be father of the year.
No.
Pick a simple start, right?
Exactly. And it really, you know, like you said, if you haven't had a good example, seek out, number one, the good example, but be that good example for your kids. And tell them you love them. We once had a father call us, and he said to Warwick, he said, why do I need to tell my wife I love her every day? I told her that when we got married. It's like, mate, you know.
Good luck with that.
I mean, I live with 6 women, so I've got to be careful what I say here. But women can be forgetful. Like they need reminding.
Sure.
Kids certainly need reminding. I would say every day.
Yes.
Tell them every day that you love them, that you're proud of them.
Yes.
But more than that, back that up with your actions.
That's right.
Because actions speak louder than words.
That's
so, find what makes your kids tick.
Yes.
Every kid, like I said before, I have 5 daughters. They're all different. I even have twins. My oldest are twins. But they're chalk and cheese. They're different personalities. So I've found that I've needed to work out what works for each of them. So I'll show them love in different ways. Try daily I tell them they're beautiful, that they're wonderful, they're amazing. They are. I'm not lying.
Right.
But they need to be reminded of this because there's something in our human wiring, especially kids, that they forget.
Yes,
so,
but
it doesn't hurt you got to change the way you speak to your family. Tell them you love them, you appreciate them, be there for them. It's not enough. I often say to dads, it's not enough just to be a good provider.
Right.
I mean, that's important.
That's great.
And it's one of the critical roles that dads play, to be a good provider. But it's not enough. You need to also be emotionally available.
Correct.
And that means spending time with them.
Yes.
But another thing we love to say at Dads for Kids is kids spell love Time.
Right.
So they, you could tell them you love them as, till you're blue in the face.
Yep.
That's a good starting point, but you've got to back that up with your actions as well.
That's
so
right.
spend time with them. It could be something as simple as going to the park with them once a week, or we're big advocates for family dinners. So we love to say, try and have a family dinner all together once a week.
Yep.
Turn off the screens. I mean, just that's a challenge. Put the phones on silent, turn the TV off, and just ask them about their day.
Yes.
It's these simple things. Sometimes hard to do. Sure. But these simple things are powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll see those changes in you.
Absolutely. And look, what I hear you saying is pick a start point.
Yeah.
So we're not here in this conversation, and I'm certainly not here in this channel and on these platforms to tell people what to do. That's not my space and that's not my endeavour. But for those who are looking for it and wanting to hear some solution-based help, what we are saying is try something as a start point. I'm thinking of the guy who struggles with his words. And generally I find when it comes to the heartfelt words, men most often struggle with those words because they didn't hear them.
Yeah.
It's not because they don't want to say them. But even that guy could start with, next time you're writing a birthday card.
Yeah.
Get the words out.
Yeah.
I love you, son. I've always been proud of you.
Yeah.
Get it out at least once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now the goal, of course, is that your son or your daughter hears it every day.
Yeah.
And that's kind of peak of the mountain, and we're all aiming for better.
Yeah.
But don't give up on best and not start at all.
Yeah.
Just because the mountain seems so high.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a very powerful story. This author, we talked about John Eldridge, and he writes a lot of stuff in this domain and on these subjects. And I remember him writing about his own story and talking about the fact that up until about age 8, he remembers having a great relationship with his dad. They would kick the ball together, and he would go on road trips with him. His father was an on-the-road salesman.
Yeah.
And so they'd spend a lot of quality time in the car together, and it was a great memory for him. But then he tells a story how his father hit financial difficulties, lost his job, and that became the catalyst that sent him on a big downward spiral.
Yeah.
And then he segues forward in his own personal story, and he talks about how not long after that, he remembers his father kind of hiding in the back tool shed for hour after hour and drinking heavily and wouldn't come out and spend time. And he remembers the sadness of his boyhood heart watching this thing crumble before his eyes. And so this kick-started a whole journey for John into manhood where his heart, even if he didn't want to admit it, and I think that's where a lot of our men are. It's hard to admit that we struggle. It's hard to admit that there's grief, that there's pain, that there's a need for help. But he talks about how even into his manhood, he knew subconsciously he was still craving that connection, and he knew he'd lost something. But then he tells this beautiful story, and he lives in Colorado, so you can imagine all of the scene there where he's going fly fishing and all the rest of it. And he tells this beautiful story about how one day he was out fly fishing at a new spot at a river, and he was having no luck, couldn't catch a thing. And he's looking upstream, and he can see this older gentleman who's like, he's casting his fly, and it's almost like every single cast he's pulling in a trout, and and he's looking upstream, going, well, what? And John, at this point,
good way to enrage a fisherman.
yeah, that's right. And at this point, John is a good fisherman. He's not a beginner.
Yeah.
So the old man upstream's catching everything. He's catching nothing. And so he tells the story. He goes around the back secretly to spy on the old man. What's he doing different to me? Is it the spot? Is it the gear? Is it his technique? All the rest of it. And after a while, the old man motions him over and calls him across. He says, I saw you watching me. And they have a little chat for a few minutes. And the old man says, I'll tell you what, I'll go to the spot where you are. You have my spot.
Wow.
And then he's like, apologetic. No, I don't want to interrupt your fishing. And he says, no, I insist. Yeah. You have my spot. I'll go down where you were. And the old man packs up, goes downstream, and John starts catching a few fish. The old man catches as many fish. But then in his heart, he hears this voice. Yeah, wow. And in his own journey, he describes it as like hearing a voice from heaven.
Wow.
And the voice said this to him in his heart. He says, see, look how I've been fathering you all these years. And it's so powerful because I think, again, whether we're willing to admit it or not, the human heart is craving the affirmation of that voice, the belief of that voice, you've got what it takes in that voice, and I'm here for you. If you can't catch a fish, I'll give you my spot.
Yeah.
Isn't that just the ache of the human heart, man, woman, and child? We're all longing for that.
I couldn't agree more, Andrew. What a beautiful story, and that's the need, the deep need in all of us is right there, just beautifully illustrated in that story. And what a beautiful picture of the father heart,
right,
in that old man. So that's what it comes down to.
Yes.
And so I would say to any dads watching, if you can be that for your kids, we'll change the world.
Yeah, mate, absolutely.
We will change Australia. We will change the world if we can confront those issues in our hearts and make the effort and the decision to make those daily changes to be those dads for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's segue a little here just for a moment. I want to speak to the issue of a renaissance of courage. In other words, a simple way to phrase this, and I guess I'm putting this to you for your comment, but at the same time, I'm serving this to the men and the women and the families that are watching and listening to this conversation. And I'm trying to be a provocateur and to say to them, stop asking permission to be a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm not saying that because men need my endorsement. I'm saying it because I know there's so many men out there who've been beat down by the pressures, the stress. They're fighting in their commute to work. They don't feel appreciated. They're wondering if their effort is worth putting in. And then you've got this mass narrative from mainstream media that's telling them, you should not talk.
Yeah.
You should stay silent in your corner. You've had your time in history, and now it's our turn.
Yeah.
And what I'm wanting to do is to say, no, regain your courage.
Amen.
Stop asking the world permission to be a masculine man.
Yeah. Well, we need men. we need men. I mean, you look around the world now, we're having war, we've got these problems. It's actually because of weak men, weak leadership. We've got
weak men.
Weak men are causing a lot of issues right now.
Yes,
so
are.
The answer is not for men to be more quiet or to stay in their corner. It's for men to rise up and in love, with a servant heart, lead their families, lead their nations. So, I mean, really, that's really what brought Dads for Kids into existence was an elderly, an Indigenous man, Uncle Ronnie Williams. He really inspired Warwick and Alison to found Dads for Kids. And he said, it was the late 90s and they were in Canberra at Parliament House. And he stood up in a meeting and said, Australia needs more fathers. Fathers in the home, fathers in government, fathers in the workplace, fathers in the church, fathers that aren't there to get glory or to enrich
Yes.
themselves,
Yes.
but men who will lay down their lives for their families
Yes.
and for their communities. And that's really what inspired Dads for Kids to get going. So you're hitting absolutely the nail on the head. It's almost like you've looked at our website, mate. So, but that's really, that is the answer. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you.
Yes.
And I think, men, be encouraged. Because sometimes it feels like the universe is against men, but
Right.
the universe is not against men. The universe is for men. We need healthy masculinity.
Yes.
I loved your video. Masculinity is not toxic.
Right.
It's not. That is, like, even 20 years ago, that wasn't a controversial statement.
That's
but
right.
now that is controversial. It shouldn't be. Masculinity is actually a force for good.
That's right.
Healthy masculinity
Correct.
is what actually will turn this world into a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you phrase that. Lead in love, serve with your strength.
Yeah.
This is what we need more men to do.
Yeah.
Of course, in their marriage, of course, in their family, but even in the workplace, in all kinds of organisational spaces. It's interesting. I have this conversation a lot in client meetings and when I'm teaching and training and various contexts where I talk about giving people the hint or the clue to figure out what kind of space are they in. And I go on to talk to them about the difference between fathers and kings. And then I parlay that down into the fact that a father produces a different kind of community member to a king. And what I mean is kings recruit, I should say, soldiers. Fathers raise sons. So if you look at those two lines of thought, you can have a king, you can have a father, and these are just guideline prototypes. These are not hard and fast rules, but a father in his heart wants to raise a son, biological or not.
Yep.
He wants to raise a son in order to hand over the family business.
Yeah.
In other words, the eye, the mind, the heart of the father is to make the son as big and as empowered as he possibly can.
Yeah.
The mind and the eye and the heart of the king is he wants to recruit soldiers purely for the expansion of his own kingdom.
His kingdom, yeah.
And the soldier becomes a commodity, an asset that's expendable, and we see all over the world. It doesn't matter whether you're talking business, sport, education, not-for-profit, politics, art, entertainment, media, pick any sphere or pillar of society, we see a flood of king-oriented leadership styles that are only interested in recruiting soldiers for kingdom expansion. And by the way, I'm not anti-kingdom expansion, but I am pro-healthy expansion.
Yeah.
And I think we need to ring a bell for more of this style of leadership in the home, in the community. Men who have got enough personal security, enough courage, enough power in their heart to say, my task in life is to find sons, which is non-gender oriented. I'm talking to daughters as well. Find others who I can impart to, invest in, empower. And the father task becomes, I get to release others into their destiny. Can you imagine what would happen if we saw that happening in churches, sports clubs, businesses, schools? The difference would be huge, right?
It'd be a renaissance.
It'd be a renaissance.
Yeah. It would. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Right.
And I couldn't agree more, Andrew. I couldn't agree more. And I haven't heard that analogy before, but it's so true. It's so true. It's like we have a dearth of the fathering. We've got these men building kingdoms, but it's not in the best interest of the next generation.
No.
And it's self-centered and it's short-sighted. It's not thinking about the future at all.
Absolutely.
So we need to get away from the king, that king mentality, and more to the father mentality. And like you said, it's for sons and daughters.
That's right.
One of the things with Dads for Kids, we always used to think that fathers were important for their sons and mothers were important for daughters. But through the work of Dads for Kids, we've done a lot of research, and it's actually fathers are very important, almost more important for their daughters' sense of self-worth
Yes.
and identity than almost their sons. So there's a great song, John Mayer did a great song years ago, Daughters. And
Yes.
I think he got attacked at the time by the usual
Probably
suspects.
did.
But it's such a profound song, simple song, but profound. So, the message of that song is fathers, love your daughters,
Yes.
love your sons, but especially love your daughters well, because they will love how you love them.
That's right.
But the same goes for business, like all those spheres you mentioned. The same goes. We need less men building kingdoms for themselves and more men, well, let's say building kingdoms for their children.
Totally.
Being fathers.
Yeah, spot on. And I love that you've included a John Mayer reference there, just a personal preference. But there is a great story in that song because he is writing about, an example of a girl that he's taking an interest in. And he discovers during the course of the relationship where we get this lyric where he says, "Now I'm left cleaning up the mess he made." And so he's talking about the girl's dad.
Yeah.
And it's not a song that's trying to lay blame on a specific person. It's a prototype. It's a template of what happens when young boys, young girls grow up and there's a void of the right voices, the right affection, the right affirmation. And it brings me to a really important subject, which is solo parenting. I don't have a lot of what we would call heroes, meaning I never have felt like I've made heroes out of even sporting heroes. So I've admired their skill, but I would never have labelled them heroes. But solo parents are as close as anyone, I reckon, to earning the label of hero, whether they're solo parents as a father or a mother.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that just for a moment? And maybe let's start talking about young men and young women who are being raised in fatherless homes. And because of that absence, for whatever reason, whether there's marital breakdown or dad was a bad egg, became a bad egg, whatever happened, we're not here to try and diagnose and execute the reasons and the rationale, but we're talking about the status that there are a lot of people being raised by solo parents. And it's not anti the solo parent. We're amazed by what they do. I don't know how they do it. And I honestly mean that. It's a tough task parenting in tandem, let alone by yourself.
100%.
But what can we say to perhaps the solo mums who are strong enough, and I would say balanced and secure enough to recognise that there could be an absence of a voice in their kids' lives?
Yeah.
How do we encourage the mums for kids
Yeah.
about the importance of where do her children get that voice and that affirmation from?
Great question, Andrew. Great question. And look, Dads for Kids, we advocate for single dads, but we also advocate for single mums. And funnily, we often get single mums reaching out to us. We've had a few already this year wanting to find a support group for their children.
Wow.
And because they recognise that their children maybe aren't getting that good father figure or those good male role models in their children's lives. So it's something we're still sort of, something we do through our work, but we don't sort of have any specific programs, but it's something we're kind of grappling with, and there's a big need for this. So,
there is.
So firstly, I'd just love to say we tip our hat to all the single parents out there, because like you said,
they're unbelievable.
They're amazing. They're amazing. I mean, my wife is amazing, and it's hard enough parenting our daughters, the two of us.
Yes.
So, I can't imagine how difficult it is for a single parent. So I just want to really honour single parents, and in no way is Dads for Kids anti-single parents. We want to support all parents,
of course,
but obviously our focus is on dads. But we've been big advocates for single dads over the years. So to answer your question, I think, number one is probably recognising those deficits.
Yes.
So single parents often do, but, you might see it in behavioural things. Sometimes, especially as boys grow older, they might be mixing with the wrong crowd or seeking out these male relationships. If you're a single mum, that may be because he's seeking out a father figure. So do what you can to seek out good male role models in your community. A great place to start could be a local church, but even sporting clubs. There's men that every weekend dedicate time to coaching the local soccer
right.
team or the local footy club
Correct.
or cricket team. So there's men out there who
Yes.
are, they're committed to this.
That's
It
right.
might just look like weekend sports,
Yes.
but they're actually, in a way, fathering these children.
Yes.
They're coaching them, but they're also coaching them in life, and they're learning life skills.
Absolutely.
So it could be something as a sports team. But yeah, certainly a youth group. Most churches have great youth groups. I know at my church there's a great young guy running the youth group, and he's a young man. He's not a dad, but he's almost kind of fathering these kids because he's a role model to them, and he has a great team of leaders working with him as well. So it could be a church, a club, uncles, family members, extended family members. Seek out those role models that if you're seeing these things, that desire in your kids to have those good role models. If you're a single dad, it could be a good female role model for your daughters. So who might teach them. I know, there's things I can't teach my daughters. That's one of the reasons I'm so thankful for my wife, because she's. So it goes both ways, but definitely, listen to your kids. They won't always tell you things. Sometimes you've got to read between the lines a bit as a parent, but look for those triggers or those warning signs, or often they're behavioural things, but often there's a reason why they're doing these things or saying these things.
Right.
Often it's non-verbal.
Correct.
But look for those signs and do what you can to seek out that support.
That's right. Yeah, great advice. I think that's what we can encourage people to do, is to observe what's going on. Look for those hints, those clues, maybe some deficits, and then seek out a way to expose your children to the right kind of influences. I think that's probably a great little segue into maybe one last point and one more conversation piece that we can have today, and that is this super important role that men of all ages can play, whether they are fathers biologically or not, whether their children maybe are grown-up adults already and have moved away from home, whether they've never had children and won't ever have children. All men can actually play a role for somebody's child in being a positive influence. I'll never forget seeing in my YouTube feed several years ago, and it's come up a few times since, a little mini clip of former English Premier League soccer player Ian Wright, who was a very well-known striker for Arsenal for many years, and had a difficult childhood because of fatherlessness and broken home and all the rest of it. And he is surprised on camera by the reappearance of one of his high school teachers.
Yeah, wow.
And he stands up and you see the look on Ian's face. His jaw drops open as his mouth begins to talk before he can get his brain in gear. And I can't remember the teacher's name, but he basically says to him, "I thought you were dead.
Wow.
Somebody told me you were already dead." And then you see his face change. He begins to tear up and he's overcome with emotion because he realises he gets one more chance to thank this teacher. And anyway, the backstory is this teacher, who he hadn't seen for decades, was almost the only male voice in his whole childhood that believed in him.
Wow.
And said to him, "Ian, you can amount to something.
Yeah, wow.
Don't give up on yourself."
Yep.
And so I think stories like that remind us that, particularly for men out there, like I said, maybe you don't have your own kids, maybe they're grown up, maybe you're not going to have kids yourself. It doesn't mean that you're exempt from playing a great role as a father in our community, an encouraging word, volunteering somewhere in the community, being a positive role model, opening up conversations. There's so much we could say about this, isn't there?
Oh, exactly, 100%. And could be something as simple as a smile. I'll never forget a few years back, my wife was in the car. I think her sister was in the car as well. But they were driving somewhere locally, and there was a group of, let's call them bikies. I mean, they were a gang of, not a gang, they were some motorbike riders, older men, but sort of 4 or 5 of them, and they'd been pulled over by a police officer. So they're there sort of they weren't happy. There was
Sure.
a tense situation, and and Jodie, my wife, pulled up in the car and my daughters decided to put the window down
Yes.
and started waving at these
Right.
men. Anyway, their demeanour instantly changed, and they start smiling, and
Right.
they're waving back at the girls, and it was just an amazing example of how these gruff men in a difficult situation. And yet my daughter's there and just in this split second totally disarm the situation. So look, without, men you don't want people being creepy about this, but,
Sure.
you just don't know. A simple smile, a simple hello. Men, if you've got a passion for sport, volunteer to coach. There's simple things, but
Yes.
you just don't know the impact that you could have
Can
on
make a difference,
on a kid's life. There's kids out there who are crying out for father figures.
Yes.
And I'd speaking as a young dad, where young dads are working dads, that we're often so busy. Older men, often retired, they might have a bit more free time. They could volunteer at their local sporting club or whatever it is. Don't hold back. Don't think that you're not needed or that you're not important.
That's right.
Men have something to offer our communities.
Absolutely.
Right around Australia, right around the world. And
That's right.
I think if men could understand that, I
Yes.
think it could really make a positive impact on our society.
100%. I think it goes very much to the deep purpose of a man's life. Like we said, whatever your own family status right now, if you can engage in that mode of investing in others, encouraging, making a contribution to others, I think that really brings a man to a place of understanding, like convergence and sweet spot and reason for being here on the planet. And interestingly, I was just remembering that one of the better translations for our English word father is the word proton, which means start point.
Wow.
In other words, a father is meant to be like a seed that gets things growing.
Yeah.
And I would love to be part of the process of encouraging more men, regardless of their age, regardless of their own story. Sure, get your own healing, talk about your issues, absolutely. But also be in output mode and help to make that difference for others, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think, Warwick Marsh often quotes Mahatma Gandhi, who famously said, be the change you seek.
Right.
But I think for men, that's a great message.
Yes.
I'm not really one to quote Gandhi, but he's not my cup of tea. But look, it's a simple idea that we see so many problems in the world, and I believe with all my heart that men can be the answer to if not most, many of those problems. So,
absolutely.
So I would just encourage any men watching, don't ever think that you're not needed or not wanted. We need more positive male role models.
That's right.
In this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on the show, on the podcast, on the YouTube today. Thanks for being on with us.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are watching and listening, make sure that you do check out the show notes and the description, dadsforkids.org.au. Read up about what they're doing. Get involved, maybe for yourself or a friend or a family member. Do something, make a start somewhere. And of course, as always, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do that. Hit the like button. Put a comment in, ask a question. I do read them and I will get back to you. Make a suggestion of who else you'd like to have on the show or where you can get that kind of help that you need. And of course, if you're listening to this conversation and you think of a friend or a family member that would do well to hear this, share it with them so that they get a chance to hear it as well. But until next time, that's all we got time for. Bye for now.